Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the intersection on the Politics Social channel. I am Rachel Harris, and I am really happy to be here after a bit of a break. So great to be back, and I'm exceedingly happy to be joined by Jacqui Taylor. Welcome, Jacqui.
Hello, nice to be here.
Now, quickly, how would you like to introduce you? How do you describe yourself?
As you said, my name's Jacqui Taylor. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a writer and meditation teacher and mentor, and I also am an ambassador for FLAG, parent ambassador for FLAG, as a parent of a trans child.
Wonderful. We'll talk. Well, I'm sure we're going to talk a lot about
Mm.
flag as part of this discussion. So can you just give us a little bit of a background, a little bit about your background story, and why is it you're sitting on this channel with us this evening?
Oh wow, I don't know how far you want me to go back. I've got a bit
Oh,
of an eclectic mix in
go for it.
my sort of adult life if we
Yeah.
start from there. So
Hmm.
I am from Yorkshire, which you might be able to tell from my accent. I've been married for 25 years. I've got two kids and a dog. Dog's very important. Um, I originally started life doing an engineering degree, and I worked for BT for about 8 years. And
Hmm.
I sort of loved the idea of that life, but it didn't love me very much. And I ended up very stressed and not very well. And I ended up
Hmm.
deciding that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I
Yeah.
retrained as a physiotherapist, went back to uni for 3 years, had a child in the middle of it, worked in the NHS for a little bit. And then I went to work privately.
Right.
And because my son was really young and it was just really hard working full time in the NHS.
Frozen. Ooh. It's- They're watching Netflix in Jackie's house.
Uh, venture.
You're back.
I'm back. Have you
You're
lost
back.
me?
We did lose you. Yeah.
Okay, where did we get to?
No, I think you were at university, had your
Uh,
son. Yeah.
so I went to, I set up a business, set up a
Mm,
physio business
yeah.
in my local town and did that for about 13 years. But
Mm, yeah.
yeah, we were hit really badly with COVID. So
Yeah.
that was not very joyous. And then about 4 or 5 months into the COVID lockdown, I found out I had breast cancer.
Mm,
So that's the reason why I ended up moving away from that business. And in that time, that's when I started writing. And I wrote a book about my experiences of having breast cancer. And emerging from that experience was when my child came out as trans. So
ah.
I'm no doubt we're going to talk about that a lot later, but there was a
Yeah.
lot of things all came
Yeah.
close together, which is one of the things that sort of led me towards doing the yoga and the meditation and a lot of the things that I do because I enjoy it and I find them really helpful. And again, that may come up in terms of sort of how I kind of keep myself grounded
Yes.
in these difficult times.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Um, and has led me to sort of living the life that I live now, where I'm trying to share that with people alongside writing another book and doing my campaigning work. So it's quite a mix of things. It keeps me very busy in a different way to how it was before.
Yeah. That's
So
amazing.
yeah, the
What
book's slow progress, but we're getting there.
yeah.
But,
So what's the second book on? You didn't.
so the second book is about my experience as a mum of a
Right.
trans
Okay.
child, and I
Perfect.
decided to start writing it back in February 23 in the midst of all the Scottish
Mm,
GRC changing and just
yeah.
being appalled by the things that people were saying on television about
Yeah.
trans people and thinking, okay, you've got no idea that's my child you're talking
Yeah.
about. And it's been very slow in its incubation, but that's been a good thing, I think, because I think if I'd written it even 6 months ago before the election, it would have had a very different tone to the one it's going to have now.
Right.
Because obviously there was this feeling or this hope that things might improve.
Yeah.
And as I know you just talked about at length on this podcast, they haven't. And if anything, it feels worse
Yeah.
because of that. So
Yeah.
in some ways it feels like it was the right thing to not have already done it because now I can write it from a very different place of
Yeah.
um of a reality which we all hoped we weren't going to get to, didn't
Yeah.
we? And also my daughter's older, and she's moved on, and other things have happened. So the story, and I've done a lot more stuff. So the story's kind of enriched
Yeah.
as a result of that.
Wonderful. So I would be interesting for if, and as much as you would feel comfortable sharing, obviously my coming out to my parents, and there was a journey of my journey, and then I told my parents, and then there was this journey together. Could you describe a little bit about your, your child's journey
Yeah. So
and the
we
meet up with you, and how that went, and where you are now, and as far
so
as much
the
as you like to
the
share.
initial, because of where we were as a family,
Mm.
even though because of COVID, with me being going through my treatment, we'd become quite splintered, I think. We were kind of all in the same house, but all in our own little bubble, doing our own thing, and everybody was just kind of trying to cope.
Mm.
And that summer, I was just aware that my youngest was behaving out of. Always been quite quiet,
Mm.
and particularly quiet with things in COVID. They'd had to change schools, and lots of things were going on. But there was just something, and I can't remember. They're probably a bit more irritable and bad tempered, and answering me back and things like that. So I was like, something's going on here. So I actually spoke to one of their friends' mums, to say, do you know what's going on? And they did a bit of rooting around and asked a couple of questions and came back to me and said, looking at their Instagram, I think, they might be transgender, which I was a bit like, oh, okay, that was not what I don't know what I thought it was, and that wasn't what I thought it was. So I went away and kind of mulled on that for a bit, and then it wasn't an intentional thing, but I was in the room one day and I was just clearing up, and I found a bag of girls' clothes under the bed.
Mm.
So in as nice a gentler way as I could, I hope it was remembered that way, I just asked,
Yeah.
I just said, that I'd found these clothes, and was there something that they wanted to tell me? And they just said as bold as brass that they were transgender and they wanted to be called something different. And I, even though I sort of knew what was coming, um, it was still a bit of a shock.
Mm.
So in terms of that coming together, I knew I needed to be supportive.
Yeah.
And inside I was just like, oh my God, I don't even know what I'm supposed to think.
Yeah.
Um, and it was that sort of lesson of, I sort of felt, that whole thing about never arriving in life. I felt like, I'd finished my treatment, I'd sold my business, everything was going to be fine. We were coming out of COVID, and then this happened.
Yeah.
And it's just like, if you ever need a lesson in life, just keeps happening to you, and you never, that's how I felt about it.
Mm.
And then I just went massively into researching and trying to fix mode, by thinking if I found out enough stuff, I'd magically understand it and be able to fix everything. And all the time supportive. The school were great. They were really happy to use names and pronouns. There was never any issue. And I'm sure we'll dig into that later, but there was never any issue with the school, either school that they've been at, which has been really good. But I went off down a really weird path because I made some bad choices about the things that I looked at and the things that I read, and ended up in this sort of treading water pattern where I didn't really know what I needed to say to them. And I was just making up all sorts of things in my head as to why this was happening. Because she's also autistic, and so there's all these things I was like piecing together. And now that's one of the things I think is so hard if somebody's child was coming out now, because there wasn't at that point, because there wasn't all that's quite as much in the media as there is now. It was probably there if you were looking for it, but it wasn't obvious. Whereas now, obviously, so much has been said, and very visibly said.
Yeah.
I don't even know where you'd go with that, because straight away you'd have already heard all this negativity, whereas I hadn't necessarily heard any of that. I just kind of went off researching and ended up going down that path. So we kind of just rubbed against each other for a good year, just like trying to do our best, but not really understanding. And and I didn't really know anybody. I hadn't gone involved with FLAG and the parents then, so I was very much just like talking to people that I already knew. I knew a couple of parents of trans kids who occasionally spoke to me, but it was it helpful? It might have been. It probably was helpful, but again, I think because of other things I was doing, it didn't really hit the mark. And the thing that really changed it for me is I went to a conference, a women's conference, and there just happened to be a trans woman speaking at it. And she sat next to me, which was just as she sat down, I was like, oh, because I saw her name badge and realised who it was because I'd seen her name on the agenda. And then she got up and she just blew my mind, because she was just like this really magnetic, sassy, positive, confident woman talking about her journey, but just there and she was fine. And I was like, oh my God, people, this is okay. All the things I was starting to kind of build in my head kind of went away. So I spent a bit of time talking to her, and that's when I sort of went onto LinkedIn, connected with her, and then just started finding all you lovely people. And really started to see then where I was just like banging up against my own prejudice all the time and not really knowing how to peel it away. And that's when I approached FLAG. And that was a big change point, because just by going on that call and talking to other people and getting a different kind of support back just seemed to just make everything feel lighter, which is the power of a community, isn't it?
It is. Can you just explain what FLAG is to the viewers?
Yeah, so FLAG, it's a double F, and it stands for Friends and Family of Lesbian and Gay. So that's the initial members. It was set up.
Needs a rebrand.
It does need a rebrand. So now they don't say that. They just say FLAG, and then it's supporting family and friends of LGBTQ plus individuals. But that's why it's got the weird double F. But it was originally set up as an umbrella organisation. It was originally set up as an umbrella organisation for in-person support groups back in the 90s. And then they did a lot of campaigning around, getting rid of Section 28, equal rights on marriage and adoption and all, and sort of fertility and all those things. And then they stopped campaigning because they felt like they didn't need to do anymore. And as of the start of this year, we're now campaigning again. So, and most of the new families joining are parents of trans kids now. That's the majority of people. And they provide really great resources on their website for people who've if they've got questions, if their child has come out, or if they think that their child might be LGBTQ plus and they want to read about it. With the campaigning now, we're doing a lot of letter writing and encouraging people to fill in things on consultations and stuff. So, and they're just a great bunch of people. And what's really nice about it is that there's families in there who have been involved for years, like 20 plus years. A lot of them who've got gay and lesbian children who are obviously all grown up now. But they just bring kind of a level of reflection to the process, because everybody isn't just new or relatively new to the scenario. So that was really, really helpful. So yeah, they're a great bunch of people. A good bunch.
They sound it. And there's an American equivalent. Is it PFLAG as well?
Yeah, I don't know what the connection between the two is, to be honest. I will confess, but there is.
Amazing. So this is going to bring us on to the next question, is that obviously when I transitioned, it was all, I wouldn't say it was hunky-dory, but rights have gone forward and then they suddenly have gone backwards. And obviously I'm fighting for adult trans and non-binary rights. But what forms for trans kids and their parents, what is the rollback of rights attacks on young trans kids in the UK? What form has that taken over the last few years?
So predominantly around healthcare. I mean, when I was quite late to the party, obviously, it was like we were talking 2021,
Mm,
2023 was with the Scottish change to the gender recognition certificate was the
yeah,
first sort of legislation bit that I kind of tagged on to. Then there was that talk about the Equalities Act.
yeah. Mm,
Um, but the cast review was already bubbling under, and I was sort of vaguely aware of it. One of the
yeah.
parents that I knew had told me, but didn't really understand it.
Mm,
Um, I just knew that we'd been to the doctors and we were on some long waiting list. And then
yeah.
I unfortunately made the mistake of listening to that Hannah Barnes book
Oh,
about the Tavistock and Portman. That was one of the mistakes that I made,
yeah.
and learning all sorts of things which I now know to be not necessarily completely
Mm,
factually correct.
yeah.
So I'd say around healthcare and just making it really difficult for children to get access to care, or any kind of support at all. And then around the schools guidance piece that came out earlier this year,
Yeah.
which unfortunately, even though nothing's formally been put in place, does seem to
Mm,
have given some people the permission to then start actually, treating children really badly. I mean, there was just something this week, wasn't there, about someone being in court about that and it being ruled against the way they were treating someone. So,
yeah.
um, yeah, it kind of felt like things had snowballed over the
Mm,
last, well, it's 2 years now nearly, isn't it?
yeah.
But it was predominantly healthcare, and with the cast review that was actually there was an interim report that had already been published. I can't remember what year that was, but the actual review came out in April this year.
Good. Yeah.
Um, and I don't know if you've talked about that before on this program, and I don't want to get into all the ins and outs of it, but the sort of general consensus is, and by some reputable organisations, that it is a flawed piece of research, that they
Yeah.
haven't followed proper methodology, and that they have been quite selective in the way in which they've presented material.
Mm,
Um, and I think the disappointing thing is that no one's questioning it, and everyone's just carrying on like it's, even with the change of government. And I think that's the biggest disappointment, is that
yeah.
nobody's stopping to look at it despite all the things that's been put out there.
Yeah. And that's really, really good description. And I mean, it feels like what I did watch, and I've said this to the viewers before, there was a lot of trans people who work in the profession who have said, well, now it's out. It is subject to peer review now. And what we're seeing is when it is peer reviewed, it seems to have flaws. We know that, yeah, Yale, I think it's Yale
Yeah,
Law,
yeah.
criticized it. Japan has said it in their
There's
in
some Australian report as well. They've
yeah. And so
criticised it.
when
There's
it
quite a
gets dug
few.
into, it feels. But what I'm also seeing is it's being used as the shield against the dark arts. So the school's guidance. Oh well, Cass says you shouldn't affirm their gender, but hey, that's in a medical context. Even though I think that's wrong. This is about inclusion of kids in school. This is not what that was used for. So it's beginning to get welled out as a sort of shield against the dark arts everywhere. Which so that has been disappointing. And obviously, there's already now an adult review coming up, which we're all worried about as well. But also the school's guidance. I mean, what I read in the guidance is what they're not using the word transgender or non-binary or affirming. It's like
Gender questioning.
questioning.
Yeah.
I knew my gender when I was 4 years old. I don't think gender questioning is and we've seen the court's guidance going that way, that it's contested and blah, blah. So
Mm.
the way that this stuff is now bedding in, it does feel like the new government that's come in has kind of said, "Oh, we're just going to just accept it and move on," and that's what I think is disappointing. Is that how you agree with
Yeah.
that?
I
Yeah,
mean, we spent a long time as FFLAG, as a campaigning team, putting together a response to the gender questioning guidance early this year. And essentially, when you look at it, it's just exclusionary for trans
yeah,
kids. It's about protecting everybody else in the school from some child that they think is a threat. And
yeah,
it is grounded in the belief that
yes,
trans people of any age, but in this case, we're talking children,
yeah,
are a risk and a threat to their peers, which
yeah,
is not the case. And as I say, we were very fortunate. My daughter's high school, there was particularly a couple of members of staff who were absolutely brilliant, and she just didn't have any problems at all. Certainly not from teachers. There
mm,
might have been the odd kid, but it got dealt with.
yeah,
Um, there was a bit of an issue about using changing rooms and things, but she said she didn't really want to go in the changing rooms anyway. She was quite happy just using the disabled loo and having that privacy.
Yeah.
But they didn't handle that well. But I didn't know then what I know now, and therefore I didn't know how to actually respond to them when they said that yes, she could do PE with the girls, but she couldn't use the changing rooms. Now I have more information and ammunition to be able to answer that question.
Yeah.
And but I didn't then.
Yeah.
And she was happy
Yeah.
with what they did. So and the same, you know, she's gone to her sixth form college with her new name and her you know, preferred gender, and there's not been any trouble at that. And you know, so in that respect we've been really lucky. And I think all I can see is if I were to play back the last 3 years without that school support, that would have been pretty desperate.
Yeah.
And that's a real understatement as well, because I can't imagine that she would have really wanted to carry on being at school every day if teachers weren't using the names she wished them to use and pronouns and things. So that guidance, which I don't see it being taken out, they've just made a reference to it in that new document that's come out.
Yeah, there's another piece of work they've got to draft on looking after specifically on trans kids, which we don't know what that looks like yet, as far as I read. I mean, it's about exclusion.
Yeah,
and it feels like
and it's
the genie back in the bottle, right? Yeah.
And I just think it's a shame that, you know, most of the teachers that I know and people you speak to aren't in support of it. They don't like their professional judgment being questioned, and they, you know, for the most part, are good at taking care of the children in their care.
Yeah.
And, you know, I know quite a few teachers, they were quite appalled by that original guidance, but it, you know, it wasn't statutory. So that does all feel quite daunting, really, if that goes into place, because, you know, I have met on the talks that I do for FFLAG, for large corporates and things, you know, it's usually around Pride Month or Trans Awareness Week.
Yeah.
You know, we have had parents come on there whose kids have stopped going to school because they're not supported, and they've literally not been to school for 2 years. So, you know, how can that be right when they just want to be treated like a normal child and well, not a normal child, I shouldn't say that, but, you know, treated like any other child and just be allowed to go to school and be respected. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard. And from a personal point of view with the healthcare, you know, we've had not great experience with our GP at all. And I feel like I've seen firsthand some of the bias coming through that has now been made evident in the report that Transactional have put together of people who have been refused HRT and the reasons that have been given for that. I feel that the reason I was given by my GP for them not supporting us, if we chose to go privately and they'd like not being able to do blood tests or support us, I feel there was a lot of that evident in the response that I got to asking those questions based on the Transactional report.
Yeah, that's been a handy report. I mean, the attacks on trans children's care is much the same approach they're taking on adults. Suddenly, lots of our friends, their GPs just pulled their HRT, or based on either they say they're not trained on it, or they just say it's my belief, which is something they're not allowed to do. And you know, it's upsetting, especially if you've been on HRT for 20 years, right? And the GP says, "Oh, I'm not going to give it to you anymore." You're doing harm. That trans person's going to get brittle bones. They're going to not be able to sleep or concentrate. They're not going to be able to earn a living. So you're actually doing harm, you know. And that the letters that Transactional have said, you know, you write and say that and get their GMC number and start reporting them and getting into it, because you have to fight back. And it's knowing how to do that. And I think the good news is that we are beginning to know how to do that. But GPs have surprised me in the adult.
Yeah, I think both that and with the, you know, the evidence of the teachers. And I know I was on a call with a group of people for FFLAG a few months ago, and there was various people from organisations supporting LGBTQ plus children in a mental health capacity,
Yeah.
and they were saying that they were seeing an awful lot more kids having issues at school. And it's a little bit like the issue around the GPs. It's as
Yeah.
if that guidance has emboldened certain
Yes.
teachers to feel that their own personal bias is allowed to come out in their professional
Yeah.
role. And the same thing's happened with the GPs.
Yes.
And as somebody, you know, who has worked in healthcare in a professional capacity, that isn't something that you're supposed to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk too much about blockers because we talked about a lot about that on this channel. But did you see we were talking briefly about the Natasha Kennedy, research. Did you see some of the stuff that was in the What the Trans podcast, which we often recommend to people on this channel?
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a great piece of research. I understand that it's being put out in a certain way to meet some timeframes, and that
Yes.
still needs to be reviewed. But the fact that they've been able to collate that data.
Can you summarize just the two big
Yeah,
points?
I mean, my understanding of it is that, you know, if people, when kids are prescribed blockers, although there's an expectation, isn't there? And so again, this is some of the stuff in CAS, that those children are suddenly expected to be like miraculously better and their mental health improve. And that's never the expectation. I'd listened on another podcast, some other doctor based here they might have been American actually or Australian, but saying that, you know, the expectation of giving a child puberty blockers is that they become no worse, that you can't necessarily expect their mental health to miraculously improve.
Yeah.
Because you haven't actually changed the thing that is upsetting them. They just aren't progressing with those bodily changes. And therefore, like, no worse is a good outcome for those children and with their mental health. And that seems to get missed in a lot of the reports. So it was really good to hear Dr. Kennedy's feedback on that. But you know, the kids that get it, they feel relieved and they improve and they're getting better outcomes. And there's a lot of years of data, isn't there, to be able to support that
in lots of different countries.
And the people that aren't getting it, you know, they're suffering terrible mental health issues and you know, self-harm, suicidal thoughts, and you know, there's been some very tragic reporting of many children you know, dying by suicide, which is also really, really tragic, and seems to be people are trying to break that link between the two. But I'm pretty certain if I was that parent, and I'm, you know, we were never in that, we would probably was too old that to have been something. But you know, their mental health is, again, it's one of the arguments in CAS, isn't it, and things, is that children have got complicated mental health issues and that they're not immediately solved if they are then affirmed as trans. But then mental health, you know, I've had mental health issues in the past. They don't just go. Because you know, you can change the thing that might be the underlying cause of it, but things can, particularly if they've been dealing with it for a long time, these things don't just disappear straight away. But that doesn't mean that you're not on the right path to helping someone feel better. And
it does feel, sorry to interrupt, I mean, it does feel like, maybe you have mental health, maybe you're neurodiverse, maybe you're something else. Anything but being trans is what it feels like in the cast. That's the bad outcome. That's how it feels when you read it. Well, okay, maybe you're trans, but it's like after 20 other options, where, you know, you might be a multitude of options. A lot of trans people are neurodiverse. I'm dyslexic. You know, everybody's got, you know, and so what? We are multi-layered.
But so are cis heterosexual people as well.
Yeah.
So it's like they're trying to make out that you can't be more than one thing, and that's like not true for anybody. So why should it be true for trans people?
And yeah, absolutely. And also the other aspect of the podcast talked about the new treatment centers for trans children. So what are your views? You and I have talked about this before, your views. I mean, they do feel like, I mean, I know this is a horrible thing to say, but they feel like conversion therapy centers. It doesn't feel like,
I have asked, you know, I didn't know a huge amount about conversion therapy, but there's a wonderful gentleman involved in FFLAG who was part of an evangelical Christian group when he found out his child was gay. And he has lots of very strong opinions, having come from that place and knowing where conversion therapy kind of how it can be manifested. And I have asked him a few times, because I'm like, you know, just tell me how this isn't conversion therapy. I can't. And he's like, but it is. You know what I mean? I've had to like qualify for myself that what I'm reading into these new centres, reading the conclusions of the CAS review, reading, there was an independent report. I write on Substack, and there's a gentleman on there who is a scientist, has got no affiliation to any community, but had assessed the whole of the CAS review in a completely methodical, scientific, unbiased way, and you know, wasn't on any side, but had provided that analysis. And their analysis of the you know, the outcome is that they've taken the bits of research that had the least backing, which was about psychological support being the thing that helps children, and made that the entirety of what these new centres is, without any specialists in dysphoria or gender, and just treating it like these kids have just got mental health problems, and it just doesn't make any sense, and that we're going to find any other reason why you aren't feeling very well other than the fact that you're trans.
It concerns me that if I was the parent of a trans child, you know, would you want to take your child to a center? Because all the experts in gender research or gender treatment won't be working in these centers, right? They'll go off to another country and treat trans kids in the way that most established countries do it. And so the people that are in these centers, it will feel like they won't want trans to be the outcome, and that child to thrive as a trans child and get on with it.
And if you've no experience in dealing with children, how would you even know? You know, and there are people in this country who are still working in, you know, working privately, supporting trans kids, and that, you know, and adults, and obviously coming under quite a lot of scrutiny, and their jobs are being made very difficult when they're offering support to people. But yeah, I mean, I've been very reluctant. Well, we've had, you know, emails and things asking us questions from NHS and things about what we're doing. We were taken off the waiting list because we fell into that 17 to 25 bracket. So we're in like no man's land at the moment, like hovering around, not quite sure what's going on.
But it feels
and I've been
sorry.
No, just I've been really careful about what information I'm sharing with anyone. So absolutely, I wouldn't want to take it. Well, I've been two minds whether to take a child.
Because also
I know there was some reporting of. Sorry, say that again, Rachel.
So I was just saying, it's also that you're coming up against officialdom, and you're going into something, to a new service that doesn't particularly, it feels like the outcome of being trans is a bad outcome. You're taking your child there knowing that you want that treatment that you know that you're getting in other countries, and you're not it feels like, you know, the connection to you're telling the government supported service that your child is trans and you want them to be treated, and it feels like a little bit socially servicey. It feels like you're connecting you're declaring something personal about your family to an official body that may intervene in your life in a way you might not want them to, if that's how it feels.
Yeah, quite possibly that could be the outcome. And I know there have been some issues, haven't there, about people being asked what care they were getting for their children.
And we know that's in America, you know, the advanced red states. If you give your kid transgender care, you get reported to the state and they might be taken away from you. We're not there yet, but that's you know, as we often talk about this channel, trans kids, trans adults, same-sex marriage, women's rights, that's the pecking order of people taking rights away. The people attacking trans people are the same people who want to attack women's rights in many cases, according to the UN. And so this kind of, we know there are red states in America saying if you've got a trans child and you start giving them treatment, the doctor could be prosecuted, you could be prosecuted. That feels like, with our close connection to the US, this feels a little bit in that mix. Now, I might be wrong, but it feels like that.
Yes, I try not to
talk me off the ledge.
No, well, because I try not to think about it that way, because I would be on the ledge. And I do worry about it. But
so do I.
I can maintain an element of hope and optimism that we wouldn't get there, because although at the moment, given the things that are happening within the Department of Health and Social Services, I'm not filled with confidence. Mentioning no names, but I I am very aware when I speak to our general practice
Yeah.
About how things may or may not be viewed
Yeah.
behind closed doors, and things that aren't necessarily. And some of the conversations I've had, I've felt
Yeah.
that there's an element of judgment and
Mm.
not being 100% sure what they're doing with that information. So yeah, I
Yeah.
can relate to that, but I'm trying to stay not, because otherwise I would just
No,
I
no, I
can't be I
agree.
can't be worrying about
And
it
I'm
all
not
the
saying
time.
that's this is happening. I don't want to get sued or anything, but I'm just thinking it's how it feels at the
Mm.
moment. We don't know. There's not enough information out there. And none of the stuff we're reading that they have put out gives us loads of hope.
No.
So I've said to you, the parent of a trans child are the best campaigners. Are the anti-trans movement that's attacking the whole movement, and they're really well organized and they're very well funded. I know you talked about a flag, but are parents organizing? Is there a group, a body to respond and represent a push against the government in some
I
way?
think outside of FLAG, I'm not aware
Right.
that there is. I think for some parents, and even a lot of the parents within FLAG, they come to FLAG
Yeah.
for their own support, as in
Yes.
it's a charity to support parents and families.
Yeah.
And then there's only certain of us that have enough energy
Yes.
to do the other things. And
Yeah.
we're always asking people to support activities. But I think particularly if you've got a child that's struggling,
Mm.
you don't, and you know this yourself, you don't always have much left to do it. If you've got a young child who is struggling with their mental health or struggling to go to school,
Yeah.
you're just head down just coping, aren't you?
Yeah.
So I know obviously Esther Jai is doing some really good work in
Mm.
schools,
Amazing.
and so she's,
Mm.
unfortunately for her, has become quite high profile and is seeing that. I mean, I don't know if I'm just seeing that because I follow it. I don't know
Mm.
how visible that is to anyone else, and what a
Yeah.
incredible human being she is
Mm.
to have come out of that awful situation. And she's actually working with them, if I've understood correctly, the mother of one of the children.
Yeah.
So I know there's a couple of things in the States.
Yeah.
There's that free mum hugs and bits and pieces who are doing things, but
Mm.
I haven't seen much evidence of it here as a parent group outside of FLAG.
Yeah.
And the long-standing members of FLAG sort of feel, we have quite a unique voice as parents.
Mm.
There are other parent groups. That's probably not fair, actually. I know there are some other parent groups because I tend to see them at Pride.
Yeah.
There's a couple of London-based ones.
Mm.
Who again provide support groups
Yeah.
and things. I'm not sure how much campaigning they do though. So I
Yeah.
may be speaking out of turn. So if there's anybody out there saying, but we're all doing this, and come forward and let us
Yeah.
kind
Yeah.
of work together, because
Yeah. The stronger the better. The more groups that get together, the stronger you become.
yeah. So, but I honestly think if it's not, it's because people are just hunkering down and looking after their own, aren't they? And it's really hard particularly if you've got young kids and
Yeah.
younger children,
Yeah.
trying to support that.
Yeah.
And it's frustrating because that voice is never there. The number I've kind of come off LinkedIn for a bit because I was finding it quite hard work.
Yeah.
And sort of posting things, some of the comments that people make
Yeah.
about parents, they kind of make us out to be monsters and
Yeah.
groomers and goodness knows
Yeah.
what else, which is
You get
obviously
called out even if you haven't got a trans child.
well, yes.
um,
And there's so much judgment there and people don't understand.
no.
And I think it's hard to understand unless you're in that situation, because
Yes.
if you're not in the LGBT community, if you don't know anybody that's trans, and then your child comes out,
Yeah.
it's a complete unknown and quite scary. So then when you're then trying to talk to a friend or another parent who has no experience of it, it's just really, really hard
Yes.
for them to understand how you
Yeah.
cope with it, come to terms with it, accept it,
Yeah.
and support and do things. And I don't hold that against people. I understand it's hard to understand. I just wish people could be a little bit more open and curious and leave their judgment somewhere else before they speak to me.
Yeah. I think the world has changed in a way that people are judgmental on everything, and trans just is one of the many topic areas. Now, Graham has messaged me to say there's some questions from the chat. I've got lots of questions I want to ask. We'll go for my questions very quickly at the end. So, Graham, do you want to voice from the gods, ask some of the questions from the chat? Yeah.
So I didn't have a lot of contact with Mermaids. I did speak to them really early on because they obviously came up, and I had one phone conversation with somebody on their helpline, and that was helpful in terms of explaining some terminology to me and bits and pieces. But beyond that, I hadn't really been involved with them because I got involved with FFLAG and the age of my child and everything, because there's a lot of people with a lot younger children. So I can't really comment. I know they've had a lot of bad press for one reason or another, but I also know a lot of people who have found them hugely supportive and have had a lot of help from them. And I think they have created to lock that. I mean, I did join the community for a bit, but they've had to lock it down and make it really quite anonymous to protect everybody in there, which has made it really difficult for them. But I hear really good things from those people that have been involved with them. So
they were a target of a number of the right-wing media, and there was a couple of slip-ups, but I mean, they've just reorganized their management structure. They're coming out strong, which I'm really pleased about. But they were obviously taking on another anti-trans organization, and therefore the media attacked them as a result. And they did, there was a really rough time for them. But I think they're coming out strong. I think they've got a new management team. They're making lots of noises on the scene. So hopefully we'll see a lot more of them. The more the merrier.
Yes, no, absolutely. And I think, it's a very specific, the issues that they're supporting parents with are very specific. And so therefore you need that environment because it is different than having an older child or being
and there's gendered intelligence that does support gendered intelligence support older children that are a bit isolated. They take them on camps to meet other trans kids as well. So there's a whole sort of age range, which I really love. Graham, more questions. Sorry,
because
Jacqui.
the kids, aren't they, like, you wouldn't put an 11-year-old kid with a 17-year-old in any other circumstances and expect them to be able to bond. So why would you expect that in this situation?
No, quite. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So let's go on, Jacqui, then to thank you for the questions from the socialites, as we call our viewers. What can allies do to help the parents of trans children? What can allies do to help you and other parents of trans kids? What are they not doing, and what could they do?
Well, I think, just keep speaking out for those who aren't able to. Like I say, a lot of parents aren't always in a position to do that, so they can't all advocate. Or they're frightened of coping with the repercussions of saying things and speaking out, or exposing their child in a way that doesn't that puts them in danger. So I think most allies are probably doing everything they can because they're just fighting for everybody's rights, and even if they're fighting from an adult perspective, ultimately that supports. And the trans kids deserve better. I've seen a lot of positive support of other allies supporting them in the work that they, the protesting that they've done, and some various visible trans people helping to raise that voice and things. So all of that helps. Helps. And also I think no judgment as well. I think if you're meaning allies who are non-trans, then I don't think that's the judgment. But I do sometimes feel that trans people, and some of the books I've read, can be a little bit dismissive of the, as we talked at the beginning, the emotional journey and some of the things that parents might struggle with. And it can be a little bit dismissive when, like when people say they're struggling with names and pronouns and things like that, because it is hard as a parent. You are dealing with your child not being who you thought they were. And, there's a couple of things that I've read where that is kind of like, oh, right, well, that's just tough, get over it. And I think there needs to be a little bit more mutual understanding
Yeah.
sometimes to see that, you know, if parents are there and that they're supporting, but they're also trying to deal with some stuff themselves
Yeah.
in order to be able to support their kids.
Yeah, I think when I transitioned and I told my mum, she was, you know, was it something I did? Was it my fault? There was a lot of that. And I introduced her to the parent of another trans child, somebody, and they went, "No, there's nothing you did. It's them. We just got to support them, you know." And it was really good, you know, it was a really helped my parents at the time. And the other, you know, I've had friends who are parents of trans kids, and when their kid came out and went back to school, other parents approached the to make sure they were okay, right? They weren't alienating the parent because they had a trans child. They were saying, "Let's go for," and making sure, you know, showing that love, right? And you're bringing up a child, and you know, whoever they are. And so the parents reaching out to the parent of a trans child was really important, and still being included. And I think that was a really nice ally thing to do. And we're here for you. And you know, so is that do you that's that your experience of that? Yeah. So the
And I think it's
sorry.
probably, not just saying, it's probably much harder if your children are
Yeah.
concerned about not being excluded. If you've got younger children, school gate,
Mm,
all
yeah.
that kind of politics is hard enough without anything else. So yeah,
It's really hard.
but it's
So,
the judgment piece, isn't
yeah.
it? It's just like we're all
Yeah.
just doing our best.
Yeah. So I'm probably asking the wrong person this, bearing in mind what you do for a living, but how do you look after your mental health?
Well, yeah, I mean, I got into doing the breathwork meditation and stuff during
Mm,
my cancer treatment, and I
yeah.
actually, you know, don't know what I would have done if I hadn't have already had that as a practice.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I just need to make sure that I'm in a good place. Because
Yeah.
if, you know, without that, and it's the thing that I want to share and that I teach is, you know, it is the whole, you know, cliche of put your own oxygen mask on first before helping anyone else. If you're not in a good place yourself, you can't even begin to cope with what you
Yeah.
need to cope with. And um, you
Mm,
can't be there for other people if you're not actually there for yourself.
yeah.
And if I break, I can't do the things I'm doing to help Robin and the rest of, you know, that community.
Yeah.
So
I love the oxygen mask. I like that. I think that's really, really good. I'm going to use that. Thank you.
yes, yeah, well, I'm walking because I have a dog, but
Yeah.
walking and
Mm,
meditation, journaling as well. I like a good journal.
yeah.
So and also just space as
Yeah.
well, and just sometimes knowing that nothing happens quickly, does it? Everything's slow, so there's not always the rush that we think there is to make things happen.
Yeah.
And you know, again, one of the biggest fallacies about what is happening for trans kids is that everything happens so slowly, which can be painful in one hand for
Yeah.
the family and the children, but also does give everybody a lot of space to adjust and get used to things and
Mm,
for things to play out. It would be nice if it wasn't quite maybe as long
yeah.
as it is, but you know, so when
Mm,
people think that stuff's happening quickly and people are making rash decisions, it's
mm.
like we're not. You know, everything takes years, as you know.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Nothing happens quickly in our space, and the attacks on us are slow and drippy. Every day there's you know, read Pink News, and every day there's a bad story. It's never a great. It's never a happy story. It's always everything is just doom gloom every little bit. So I think the mental health is really important. The walks, I do meditation as well. Occasionally, when we do get some good news, obviously we celebrate like bloody mad, but because it's like it's so rare. Well, I hope that will change, and I think it will. But it's like it's just a hard slog, isn't it? And as you say, it's a marathon, not a 100 meters race. Heroes and villains, political, non-political. Who
Mm.
are, you know, you don't have to name anybody as a villain, but you know, I like.
So,
Who are your heroes and villains?
um, if we take away anything to do with any of this, my big hero is my mother-in-law.
Ah,
She is just the kindest, nicest person, and
yeah,
completely flies in the face of the thing about, oh well, it's generational, because she's never ever had a problem with her grandchild being trans. Um,
hmm,
and I think in this space, you know, it's people like yourself and Bobby Pickard, Emily Hamilton, and the
hmm,
trans woman that I
yeah,
originally heard speak. All those people
hmm,
who've been so supportive and open to
yeah,
me when I've like got in touch with them, and you know, they've given their time to help me
hmm,
understand things. They've let me ask difficult questions,
yeah,
and then they're out there advocating. So huge fan of of yourself and everyone else.
Yeah.
Other flag parents
Yeah.
who are doing great work, and many of them who are doing a lot of the work, don't have trans
Yeah.
kids. They've got, that they're doing it. And I think, yeah, with listening to some of your other episodes, there's lots of the usual suspects come up, and there's a lot of famous parents. You've got Jamie Lee Curtis and
Yeah.
David Tennant and people, but
Yeah.
even like Will Ferrell, who wouldn't necessarily be a favourite
Brilliant.
of mine. He's
Yeah.
gone out there and put something very public,
Yeah.
and it all helps, doesn't it? It
It does.
raises the world's awareness to it.
Mm. Yeah.
And Michael Cashman is one of the patrons of FLAG, so
Yeah.
he is a really
Yeah.
supportive.
Michael Rocks. Yeah.
And then there's people like Dawn Butler, who's an MP down in London. She, she deals with a lot of intersectionality.
Yeah.
But there's some really powerful stuff, and she puts herself up and out there and takes a lot of flack for it. So I have a huge amount of time for people like that.
Yeah.
Who do that. In terms of villains, there's all the usual suspects. I'm not even going to name most
No,
of
I think
them.
we know the villains
We
are.
know who they all are, and
Yeah.
unfortunately, ever adding list, which there were some people we thought might not be, but they are.
Yeah.
But I think to be more general, it comes back to what we've already said, is about people who judge from a place of ignorance
Yep.
and don't know and just assume that they know, or abuse that position of, or their power to manipulate other people.
Mm.
I mean, we're all guilty of judging sometimes, but in this space and in others, it's just so harmful.
Yeah, absolutely. That's really good. Thank you. I love your heroes. They are good. That's so good. So political wise, what should, I mean, we're stuck with Labour now. And I worked really hard to get Labour elected. I'm a bit disappointed. So might be voting Green next time. What should Labour be doing? What are your hopes that Labour?
So I asked my daughter that question this afternoon.
Fantastic.
And her comment was way more.
Way wise.
I mean, the first thing from my perspective is they just need to ditch Cass. They need to just stop using it, as you said, like a shield for justifying everything that they're doing.
Yeah.
And start looking at it for what it is.
Do another review. I'm happy to do the BMA one. Take the BMA. Just get another review done that's commissioned by an independent body.
Yeah. And stop doing harm. They're doing harm, and include the people's in whose lives you are impacting in your decisions, because many of these decisions are between the individual and a medical professional. They're not political decisions.
Yeah.
And I have a big thing is I don't even think it should be as medicalized as it is anyway, but that is where we are.
Yeah.
And also the comment that I'd kind of thought of is like, from Labour's perspective, is that, mind you, we've had the budget this afternoon, haven't we? So I haven't really dug into that yet. But they need to stop letting the fact that they're in power get to them. Because like 12 months ago, when Rishi stood up at the conference and said those frightful things that he said, they were like really critical. And there was things that were being said 12 months ago by very, very prominent members of this government that they have completely U-turned on.
Yeah.
And they are now continuing to pursue those very policies.
Yeah, I think it's
that 12 months ago they were disputing.
Yeah, I think they have forgotten they worked very well to get into government, but have forgotten that they're now in government. That's the problem. They have huge majority. They can do anything they like. They could have redone CAS. They could have, strengthened the Equality Act, add menopause into the Equality Act. They could get on and do loads of great stuff, but they're so cautious of the right-wing media attacking them, and they're going to do that anyway, so they might as well just do it. But they're wibbly wobbly, and they're just they still got that Ming vase on the ice skating rink, and I don't understand why they don't just get on and do it. Because trans is, we often say on this channel, we are the frayed edge of a rights carpet. Trans is the battleground, but the war is women's rights, same-sex marriage. It's that, and we are here fighting alone, it feels, and we just need allies and the rest of the LGBT community and women to fight alongside us, because you can see it in fast time in America playing out. So this government really is,
I think it's so I think it's so disappointing that there are so many similarities to,
Yeah.
the 19, what's happened before in the early
Mm.
20th century.
Yeah.
And when people quote it, everyone says, "Oh, well, it's not like that." And it's
Mm.
like, but it is.
Yeah.
And um, you don't want to prove them right. Yes, we've seen it go from children's care to adult care, but
Yeah.
it's still within the trans community. We
Yeah.
don't want, and yes, there's abortion rights as well,
Mm.
but we don't want to see it go to other people because,
Mm.
but but I don't see how it's not going to, because it is
No.
like, you say it's the thin end of the wedge, isn't it?
Yeah, it
And
is. Divide and conquer.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think in terms of, you asked me about politics, that, people like the Lib Dems and the Greens, they just need to speak out.
Yeah.
They need to
Yeah.
be the opposition,
Yeah.
and speak up for these things, because they do have, they do have supportive views.
Mm.
Um,
I think the Liberal Dems will be the opposition in the next election. I think so.
I've lost you a bit then.
Oh,
I've
sorry.
lost you.
Oh, sorry. I'm just saying that the Lib Dems may be the opposition in the next election, because a lot of, if the Conservatives continue to shift right, the middle ground, those votes will go to the Lib Dems, and hopefully they'll be the opposition of whatever the coalition Labour government
Mm,
becomes. So I think things may change next time, but I think the Greens and Liberals have got their own problems. They're not as vocal as they should be, but they've got their fighting, anti-trans movements in their own parties. But they seem to be holding their own, and whereas Labour's not, it's just not a lot going on. It doesn't feel, apart from just playing it safe and not moving things forward. If you had a magic wand, not a Harry Potter wand,
no.
a wand, and you can only change one thing in the world, what would it be?
Am I allowed to have two answers to this? Because there's like an ideal one and there's a
All right, we'll give you two wands.
go on then. So on a practical case, it would be just to sort out the healthcare stuff, so
Yeah.
that trans people have the same rights as everybody else and stop pathologizing being
Yeah.
trans.
Yeah.
I think in a more fluffy way, it goes back to about people being open and curious, and not assuming that they know best about something that doesn't impact them.
Yeah.
And accepting, and accept each other. We're all different, and we should all accept each other as we are.
Yeah. And so you would wave that one and we'll all accept each other. That's the
Yes.
perfect. I like that. Now I was going to say, how do people find you? I mean, you're obviously on LinkedIn. Are you on any other platforms?
Yeah, the main platform I'm on is Substack.
Okay.
So I can let you have it's jacquisonelife.substack.com, but I can let you have a write on there, and I've got a community on there, and it's a nice platform, and it's not got too much hate on it at the moment. There's a really nice trans community on there. I found a really nice group of people on there. So
perfect. I'm sure that they'll reach out. And one thing I would just like to finish on, then we always finish on what we call pudding. By Nick from the Trawl, the podcast I recommended to you. They always finish on pudding, which is some good news or something to give us hope. Have you got a bit of hope?
So when we talked about things getting tough, I just think
Yeah.
you have to stay with some hope, and you have to believe in the goodness of humankind. Otherwise, without that optimism, it would be really, really hard to keep going. And all through history, the power of human action and collective human action has created really positive change. So we have to maintain that optimism on that kind of grand scale, that things can be better. But then also on a day by day basis, we also just have to find some joy in the really simple, small things.
Yeah.
On a day by day basis. If we're always looking so far ahead, that becomes hard. So, we just have to maintain that hope and optimism and find little glimmers of joy each day.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much,
You're
Jacqui
welcome.
Taylor, for coming on to the intersection. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and thank you for being so honest and opening to the socialites and myself.
You're welcome.
And love to have you back on again. And when we've won a few more battles, I think we'll see how we go.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, everybody, for viewing the intersection with me this evening on Politics Social. We'll be back next week. We've got another speaker coming in. I'm just working on that, and there'll be more announcements on that. So I will love you and leave you. Have a lovely evening, everybody. Thank you for all your great questions, and I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.